Welcome to BergKnifemaking.com. This is How to Build a Knife, Part 2, Bolsters, Scales, and Sharpening. So in this video, I'm going to show you the second part of building this fixed blade knife, which has stainless steel dovetail bolsters, as well as an etched blade. In Part 1, we covered profiling the blade, etching, drilling the holes, grinding the rough bevels, hardening it, basically bringing the knife to this point. And then we even went back to the tilt table bevel grinding jig and finished the bevels after. This is the post heat treating finish grinding on the bevels. The tilt table is a bevel grinding jig that Jason Northgard and I designed, manufacture, and sell. Right here it's mounted to my Origin Blade Maker 2x72 grinder. If anybody's ever interested in taking a closer look at that jig, there's a whole bunch of information on bergknifemaking.com. So anyway, Part 1 ended basically here. And in Part 2, we're going to take a look at the bolsters, the scales, and sharpening. The way I do bolsters is I clamp one side of the bolster to the blade, and I use the holes that are pre-drilled through the blade blank as drill guides. I'm not drilling all the way through the bolster here. I'm just creating indents that will be my basically transferring the location of the holes in the blade, in the blank, to the bolster material. In this case, it's 1/4 inch stainless steel, AEBL stainless steel. Now I'm going to mount both sides into a drill vise, and that's important because it holds the front and back edge parallel. And I'm going to drill 1/8 holes right through both bolsters, or both bolster material. I just find this way you really do line up the holes nicely. In addition to drilling, I'm also going to use a tapered reamer, and this is really kind of important for getting a good fit on the bolsters. I'm going to ream each bolster from the outside in, so the outside facing away from the blank is going to be a little bit wider than it is on the inside. I'm almost going to make an hourglass shaped hole. And later on, you'll see that becomes important, because once you start to peen the pins, the peening process will actually pull both bolsters together because of that tapered hole. So after you get the rough bolsters cut out, I use a disc grinder, angle grinder. You can use a cutoff wheel if you have a big piece of stainless to get rid of. Otherwise, a flap sanding wheel will bring these into size pretty quickly. I'm leaving them slightly oversized. I'm going to do the final profiling once the bolsters and the scales are attached. I can flip it over in the vise and I can rough grind the inside curve, just trying to get away, getting rid of as much material as possible. And this prevents me from having to work on the 2x72 and apply pressure, whereas my fingers would be kind of close to that belt. The next step, I'm just going to use a Sharpie marker to mark off how I want the front edge of the bolsters to be shaped. And then I can repin those together without the blade this time and go right back to the vise, right back to the flap sanding wheel, and I can just grind away the majority of this material. These flap sanding wheels on a disc grinder or angle grinder really work nicely. Next step, I'm going to go over to a large wheel mounted onto the 2x72. This is a 10-inch wheel also from OBM. And I'm going to finish grinding that front leading edge of both bolsters. So both bolsters are pinned together and they're clamped together while I'm grinding. And I'm going to go through a series of belts. You know, I started at 120 and I went to 400, 800. This is a 2000. You can see that it's starting to get to a mirror finish. It's important to polish up that leading edge because once it's on the knife, you just can't do it. The final step is to put a felt belt on the 2x72 with a little polishing compound and finish polishing that front edge. The felt belt does a great job with this. Alright, so now we're going to go over to a disc grinder. Really important when working with bolsters that the material is absolutely flat. You would think you would be able to do this on the flat platen of a 2x72, but the belt is actually not attached. It flops over that flat platen. You'll get a much flatter surface doing it on a disc grinder. So I flatten both sides, you know, one side of each, the side that's going to mount up to the blank. And then you want to mark the outside just so that you know what's the outside and what's the inside and which knife it's associated with. Now take a close look at these two. See how I've got a little bit of magic marker mark there? We're going to make dovetail bolsters, and that little indicator is where I have to grind. You know, it sounds stupid to have to put a mark there, but you know, I've done a lot of work on these things and then, you know, ground the wrong angle. So it's better to have a visual reference, especially when you're flipping these things over and when you're going back and forth to do test fits. Then I'm going on to my OBM disc grinder, and I've got the angle set at this. You could set whatever angle you want. This is approximately 45 degrees, and I'm going to grind that back dovetail angle. Now I'm ready to mount these to the blade. So I'm going to put them into position. I'm going to hammer peen them. This is an art all in itself. You'll have to try it a few times to get decent at it. You want to basically, you know, peen the pins and then, you know, get them to set down so that the bolster is flat. If you have any trouble, you can go to a vise and clamp them together and repin them. But the object is to get the bolsters nice and flat to the blade and securely in place by hammer peening the pins. Now I'm going to take a look at the scale material. This is African blackwood. I've glued on red liners, and I'm going to make the same magic marks indicating which way I want to grind the angles. I'm going to go right back to that disc grinder. I have not changed the angle at all. Really important to grind the handle material with the same setup that you're going to grind the dovetail on the bolster so that they will perfectly match. And this is not a race. You want to take your time. You want to make sure that it's nice and flat all the way across. When you're working with bolsters, especially dovetail bolsters, a lot of test fitting. So you want to repeatedly try to fit this to the blank. Make sure that there's no little air spaces, no little gaps. Hold it up to a light and take a real close look. When you're completely satisfied, then you can glue up the scales. Now, I only glue one side at a time. This is a technique that Jason Northgard had shown me a long time ago, and it just works for me. It allows me to really precisely get that one side where I want it, nice and tight inside the dovetail bolster, clamped into position. I let that dry, and then I can cut off any excess material with a pin saw or a bandsaw. That's really not that important. I can always, you know, profile the handle or the scale material on the 2x72 later. Now I'm going to drill holes through that first side of the handle material. I'm using the holes in the blank as my drill guide. So now I'm going to have two pinholes that are, you know, perfectly placed through one side and also through the blank. Now I'm going to glue up the second bolster. I'm going to put 2-ton epoxy on both the blank as well as the scale material. These have all been prepped. They've been cleaned with alcohol. They've been rough sanded to scuff them up a little bit so that epoxy really binds well. I'm going to hold this in position. I'm going to really push that handle forward into or under the bolster. I'm going to really look at it multiple times, even after I clamp it, just to make sure that it didn't pull away at all. And then once that's dry, then I'll repeat the process of drilling through the existing holes through one side, and that will create the holes through all three pieces, the handle material as well as the blank. And then I just glue the pins in, and then I can start profiling the handle and profiling the bolsters. So the bolsters and the handle all get profiled together, with the end result being material that you hopefully won't even see a gap between. The flat platen of a 2x72 does a really nice job on this. You can start with a 60 grit and go to an 80 and a 120, and then during the polishing process, you can take that down as fine as you want. Depending on what the purpose of the knife is, I'll usually profile, down to 400 or 800 grit. This is using a small wheel attachment. This is also a OBM small wheel attachment. Always remember to just slow down the RPMs a little bit just to save the bearings. But this attachment saves a tremendous amount of time. I used to do that with a Dremel grinder, and it just took forever. Now I do the shaping of the scales and the bolsters right on the 2x72 on the flat platen. I'll go through a variety of grits doing that, but I'll round over that back edge, and then I will do some hand sanding and polishing before I come back to the 2x72 on a same felt buffing belt. After the handles and the bolsters are polished to my liking, it's time to sharpen the blade. So establishing that micro bevel, I'm going to hold the blade at approximately a 20-degree angle. I established that micro bevel with a 120 grit belt. What I try to do is create a burr. So I'll grind both sides. Once I create a burr along the entire edge, then I'll go to a different belt, to a finer grit belt, and I'll slow down the machine a little bit, and again, I'll flip the burr on one side and flip the burr on the other. And then I'll go to a finer grit belt and slow down the machine again. I'll end up with a 2000 grit belt, and that's about as sharp as I take them. The blue belt here is the 2000 grit, so you can see that it's running slower. I'm not applying as much pressure, and I'm just really, because of the slower speed, I'm not grinding now. I'm really just polishing that micro bevel. And then the last step is I use the actual flat platen to hold a leather stroping belt. I do not use that under power. Some people do. And then I just stroke the belt upward a few times, and very, very quickly I end up with a knife that is literally razor sharp. Kind of running out of hair on my arm, but I did find a little patch. And that's basically it for the build. I'll put a link to part 1 on this video. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, I ask that you please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Please leave a comment in the comments section. I'd like to invite you all to join us on our Facebook group, Knives and Knife Making. Check out my website, www.bergknifemaking.com. And in addition to that, Jason Northgard and I put out a book last year called Introduction to Knife Making. So if you're ever interested in making your own blades, you might want to check that out. You can find that on my website or direct on Amazon.com. Thank you very much.